Shalom, shalom. Before I begin this lesson, I want to give all praise, honor, and the glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles, bishop, and elders, a great millstone that rule well, and peace and blessing be multiplied on all you brethren, teaching this word in all sincerity and in truth. Shalom to the hopeful elect, the 144,000, and the rest of the elect out there, shalom. I'm the brother Damal Gabar with another lesson, Lord willing to edify through the spirit and power of Yahweh by Yahweh Shai. Now, I came across this video from John Mearsheimer fan club titled Why Every Country is Preparing for WW3, which is World War III. And some of the information, I'm going to let it play for about good 11 minutes without interrupting it because I got some precepts I want to add to further, filter the information that he's given with what the scriptures say. And it's just pointing that that this third world war is inevitable. And right now, these nations are building up to fight this war. And he's going to explain the reason why, that this war is coming. And it's nothing that's going to stop it. Because ultimately, first and foremost, we know it's prophetic. We know it's the will of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. And at the same time, the information he's going to give, it further shows you that all of these countries are economically preparing for war. Like I'm gonna read in Joel the 3rd chapter, they're putting a lot of their GDP and a lot of their resources into building up their military, because ultimately these devils know what's getting ready to happen. They see the hegemonic reshaping of society. They see America losing, its top seat as a superpower here on the planet Earth. And a lot of these countries and these nations are mounting up and getting ready to choose sides because they see this shift of power is getting ready to take place. But ultimately, we know through the spirit that the ultimate shift and the ultimate change is going to be Yahweh Shai coming back and judging and destroying these nations in the midst of this third world war. But the point of this lesson is showing you that, the information he's given is prophetic, and I'm going to show you, and that these nations are building for this third world war. So let's check this out.
$2.7 trillion. Let that number settle in your mind for a moment. Not billion, trillion. That's the amount humanity spent on weapons, armies, and war preparations in 2024. The highest figure ever recorded in human history. Higher than the Cold War. Higher than the arms race that preceded World War II. Higher than any moment when great powers stood on the edge of catastrophe and somehow stepped back. But here's what makes this number truly terrifying. It represents a 9.4% increase in just 1 year. The steepest single-year jump in military spending since 1988, the year before the Berlin Wall fell, and everyone convinced themselves that great power conflict was finished, that history had ended, that we'd evolved beyond the barbarism of total war. I've spent 40 years studying how nations behave when they feel threatened. I've written books explaining why great powers compete, why security dilemmas spiral out of control, why even rational actors make choices that lead to catastrophic outcomes. And every time I present this analysis, every time I explain that the international system is anarchic and that states prioritize survival above all else, I get the same response. You're too pessimistic. You don't understand that democracy changes everything. You're stuck in outdated Cold War thinking that doesn't apply to our interconnected modern world. But the numbers don't lie. And $2.7 trillion tells you everything you need to know about where we're heading and why almost no one wants to admit it. The official narrative, the one you'll hear from politicians and pundits and policy experts, is that this spending is purely defensive. Russia is aggressive, so Europe must rearm. China is expanding, so the Indo-Pacific must prepare. Threats are emerging everywhere, so responsible governments are simply taking prudent measures to protect their citizens. And on the surface, this narrative makes perfect sense. Every government can point to legitimate security concerns that justify increased military budgets. But here's what that narrative misses. Every single nation involved in this arms race believes they're acting defensively while simultaneously believing their adversaries are acting offensively. This is not a semantic distinction. This is the security dilemma in its purest, most dangerous form. And it's the mechanism that has dragged great powers into catastrophic wars throughout history. Not because anyone wanted war, but because the logic of the international system made war inevitable once the spiral began. Let me show you what's actually happening beneath the surface of those aggregate numbers. Start with Germany. In 2024, German military spending jumped 28%, 28% in a single year. This is not incremental adjustment. This is fundamental transformation. The German Defense Ministry has drafted a procurement plan totaling 377 billion euros. 377 billion. To put that in perspective, this is the largest German military buildup since the Third Reich. I don't make that comparison to be provocative. I make it because it's factually accurate and because the historical echoes should terrify anyone who understands how quickly European arms races have escalated in the past. Germany is acquiring 400 Tomahawk cruise missiles with ranges exceeding 2,000 kilometers. The distance from Berlin to Moscow is 1,600 kilometers. Think about what that means.
These teams suck. I don't even want to go anymore.
Prize picks can make any game exciting.
Nah, all the apps are too complicated. I don't have time like that.
All you do is
Think about what message that sends to Russia. Think about how Moscow interprets German procurement of weapon systems specifically designed to strike deep into Russian territory. Now, from Germany's perspective, this is entirely defensive. Russia invaded Ukraine. Russia threatens European security. Germany, as Europe's largest economy and most populous nation, has a responsibility to deter further Russian aggression. All of this is true. All of this is legitimate. And all of this is simultaneously creating the exact conditions that make major war more likely rather than less likely. Because Russia looks at German rearmament and doesn't see defense. Russia sees the recreation of the military threat that has invaded Russian territory twice in the last century, in 1914 and 1941, costing tens of millions of Russian lives. Russia sees NATO expansion to its borders combined with German acquisition of long-range strike capabilities combined with Western support for Ukraine, and Russia concludes that the West is preparing for offensive operations designed to permanently cripple Russian power. So what does Russia do? Russia increased military spending by 38% in 2024. Russia is building a war economy. Russia is positioning weapons in places like Venezuela and Cuba. Russia is creating the mirror image of Western military posture, forcing the West to experience the same strategic anxiety that NATO expansion created for Moscow. This is not about who's right or who's wrong. This is about how security competition between great powers operates in an anarchic international system. Each side takes measures it considers defensive. Each side interprets the other's defensive measures as offensive threats. Each side responds with additional military preparations that further escalate the spiral. And at some point in this process, the distinction between preparing for war and causing war becomes meaningless because the preparations themselves create the conditions that make war increasingly difficult to avoid. This is the tragedy of great power politics. This is what I've been trying to explain for decades. This is what that $2.7 trillion figure represents. But Germany is just one piece of a global pattern. Look at Japan. Japanese military spending increased 21% in 2024. This is the largest single-year increase in Japanese defense spending since 1952, when Japan was still recovering from World War II and beginning to rebuild its armed forces under American protection. Japan is now spending 1.4% of GDP on defense, the highest proportion since 1958. Why? Because China is expanding military power in the Indo-Pacific. Because North Korea is developing nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. Because the regional security environment that allowed Japan to maintain minimal military capability for 70 years is collapsing, so Japan rearms. And what does China see when it looks at Japanese rearmament? China sees the revival of the Japanese military that invaded China in the 1930s, that occupied Chinese territory, that committed atrocities that remain fresh in Chinese historical memory. China sees Japanese rearmament as part of American strategy to contain Chinese power. to prevent China from achieving what Beijing considers its rightful place as a great power. So China responds. Chinese military spending increased 7% in 2024. This marks the 30th consecutive year of increased Chinese defense budgets, 30 years without interruption, 30 years of steady, relentless military expansion that is transforming China into a peer competitor capable of challenging American dominance in the Western Pacific. The pattern repeats everywhere. Israel increased military spending 65%, Russia 38%, Germany 28%, Poland 31%, Romania 43%. Ukraine is spending 34% of its entire GDP on military forces, the highest military burden of any country in the world. Over 100 nations increased defense spending in 2024. 100. This is not isolated response to specific threats. This is coordinated global rearmament driven by the fundamental structure of international politics. And here's the terrifying part. Every government involved in this arms race has committed to further increases in coming years. Germany plans to reach 3.5% of GDP on core defense spending, plus an additional 1.5% on broader security. Poland is building what it openly describes as the strongest land force in Europe. NATO collectively spent $1.5 trillion in 2024, accounting for 55% of global military expenditure. And NATO members have pledged to continue increasing spending to meet targets that keep rising as threat perceptions intensify. The economic implications of this rearmament are staggering and largely ignored in public discourse. When governments spend $2.7 trillion on military forces, that money comes from somewhere. It comes from healthcare. It comes from education. It comes from infrastructure investment. It comes from climate change mitigation. It comes from poverty reduction. The United Nations calculated that eliminating extreme poverty globally would cost approximately $300 billion. We're spending 9 times that amount on weapons. We're spending 750 times the entire UN annual budget on military forces. We're spending 13 times the total development assistance provided by wealthy nations to developing countries. These are not just numbers, these are choices. These are societies deciding consciously or unconsciously that preparing for war matters more than addressing the problems that actually kill people, that destroy lives, that create the conditions that make future conflicts more likely. European governments are cutting social programs to fund rearmament. The European Union approved an €800 billion military spending package over 4 years. €800 billion that will come from reduced healthcare spending, reduced pension benefits, reduced investment in education and infrastructure. German workers are seeing their social safety net eroded to fund the largest military buildup since Hitler. French unions are striking against military expenditures that require cuts to programs that protect ordinary citizens. Belgian workers are protesting a war economy that benefits arms manufacturers while imposing austerity on everyone else. And across Europe, governments are telling their citizens that these sacrifices are necessary, that security requires these investments, that the alternative is vulnerability to Russian aggression. Some of this is true, some of this is real. And some of this is the oldest trick in the book of state power, using external threats to justify domestic retrenchment, using fear to make populations accept choices they would never accept in peacetime. Let me be very clear about what I'm not.
See? And, the guy said a lot in those 11 minutes. I just wanted to let it play because it's just showing you that all roads are going to lead to this third world war. And there's nothing that any of these people can say or do that's going to stop it. And you can see all these governments around the world, as the man was explaining, is putting a lot of their GDP into armament. These nations are mounting up. They're gearing up to go to this third world war, and they're attributing billions of dollars to arming themselves. And like he said, they're taking money from basically tax money that should be going into and this is why you see America is not doing anything about its infrastructure, about the putting money into education, putting money into services that could help and promote the everyday average citizen, or the infrastructure or education, or having a better medical facilities, better medical care, because all of this money is going where they feel it needs to be going to, which is to war. Okay, so you can see, hey, as it says here in Joel, the 3rd chapter, it says Judah 3:9, it says, proclaim ye this among the Gentiles, prepare war. Wake up the mighty men, let all the men of war draw near, and let them come up. It says, beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears, right? And your plowshares and pruning hooks represent agriculture. Basically, however these countries and these nations make their money, whether it's, whatever they're importing and exporting, whether it's through natural gas, whether it's through farming, fruits and vegetables, whatever it is that these countries produce and how they're making their money is all going into their military buildup. It's going into armament. It's going into the military, the war. And remember, Trump just the other day, he just gave all American soldiers, I think, like a $1,700 bonus, which is basically him trying to, give them money so they can feel like, so they can be more on his side, so they could be more patriotic, so he can feel like their president is actually doing something for them, because behind closed doors, he knows he's about to take these American soldiers into war. They're about to go into Venezuela, And like the guy said, you see all these other countries, Germany, Ukraine, Russia, China, Ukraine, Israel, America, are putting trillions of dollars into their military, you see? So it says here in verse 10, beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. And you see that happening now. A lot of these countries that wasn't as militarily powerful as America are now building up their militaries. They're doing deals with Russia, with China, with different countries to acquire these different military weaponry, because eventually, like I said earlier, these nations they're all being geared for war. You see, there's a huge realigning of superpowers and rulership on this planet Earth. And a lot of these nations like China, Russia, BRICS, they're all trying to position themselves to be at the head of the table. And they see the decline of Babylon, the decline of America, and the EU and NATO are becoming weakened. They're becoming more isolated. So now the only things left for them to do is just build up themselves to go to war, to try to establish their dominion and whatever type of position of power that they can have. But it's all prophetic. It says, assemble yourselves and come, all ye heathen, and gather yourselves together round about. Thither cause thy mighty ones to come down, O Yahweh. Let the heathen be wakened and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, which is what? Yahweh Shabbat. Because during this Third World War, this is where the Lord is going to send back our Lord and Savior, Yahweh Shai, to come and to judge these nations in the midst of this war. So this is why the Lord is putting the spirit on them to put all these billions of dollars into their military, so that they can go into this fight, so they can gather themselves for this war, so that the will and the purpose of the Most High can come to pass. It says, for there I will sit to judge the heathen round about. So it's going to be in the middle of this Third World War that these nations are going to be judged by Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai. So it's literally inevitable. The Lord is putting the spirit on these nations to fulfill this Third World War, because prophecy has to be fulfilled. It says, put ye in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come and get ye down, for the press is full. The fats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of Yahweh is near in the valley of decision. The sun and the moon shall be darkened, and the stars shall withdraw their shining. And Yahweh, Bashem Yahweh Shai, also shall roar out of Zion, and utter his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth shall shake. But Yahweh, Bashem Yahweh Shai, will be the hope of his people and the strength of the children of Israel. You see? Because ultimately, when the Lord judges these nations, it's going to basically be their end. And this is what's going to be the beginning of the kingdom of our Lord, which is in essence the kingdom of Israel. But first, these nations have to be gathered for this Third World War. And like this guy was saying in his video, he said this is why every country is preparing for World War III, even if no one admits it. But hey, we admit it all the time, because we're constantly doing videos. We're constantly prophesying about this Third World War and how the Lord is mustering the host to the battle. And we're telling them that this war is going to be the war to end all wars because, well, let me get this. It's going to end in nuclear destruction. All right. This is Isaiah chapter 9, verse 5. It says, "For every battle of the warrior is with confused noise and garments rolled in blood. But this shall be with burning and fuel of fire." You see? What's that fire going to be? These nuclear missiles, man. You see? And this is why Babylon the Great America is going to become that desert. Because this place is going to be literally nuclearly annihilated in this third world war. You see, so these nations are being gathered to fulfill the purpose of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai and for prophecy to come to pass. This is Revelations 11 and 14. It says, "The second woe is past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly," which we, through faith and through the Spirit, believe this is to be that third world war. And remember that God said Germany is building. They're putting so much money in their military right now that they haven't done this since since the Third Reich, which was Hitler. And that war and World War II. You see, and they're building up into that very same number as we speak. And this guy said it. People don't want to admit it, but the numbers don't lie. They're not putting all this money and billions of dollars into arming themselves and building up their militaries for no reason. And a lot of them are saying, oh, we're doing it to be offensive. We're doing it to be offensively, but they're all doing it to be defensive. You see, because they're all going to have to eventually come from a certain place like, Russia is going to have to be on the defensive because we can see, hey, the pressure is being put on Russia through the EU, through NATO, through the West, and other countries as well. Because ultimately, hey, war is on the way. And it's nothing that anybody can do or say that's going to stop it. So check out this video. I just wanted to play the first 11 minutes, but you can watch the rest of the video. He makes other good points. But, hey, the handwriting is on the wall, man. All right. This third world war is going to happen. It's prophecy. It's inevitable. And, hey, Yahweh Shai is going to come in the midst of it and do away with all of these nations, man. This is why he's going to be King of Kings. And matter of fact, let me get that. You see, so those of us, who are in the right spirit, hey, this is why we're pushing for this third world war. This is why we're hastening the time, because we know the coming of Yahweh Shai, what it represents. And this is Revelations 19 and 11. It says the coming of Christ, but we know the coming of Yahweh Shai. It says, "And I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat upon him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness doth he judge and make war." You see, and Yahweh Shai is coming in the midst of the final war to make war on all of these heathens, these nations and their armies, and basically their ability to make themselves sovereigns. You see, because once Yahweh Shai comes and subdues these nations and all their armies, they're going to be rendered helpless, man. And that's when we're going to come out of those chariots and we're going to go around the world and we're going to beat these nations and the heathens into submission. And we're going to establish the kingdom of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, where all of these nations will be forced and beaten into submission to keep the law, statutes, and commandments and worship the only one true God, Yahweh. It says, "His eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns. And he had a name written that no man knew but he himself, and he was clothed with a vesture dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies which were in heaven followed him upon white horses." And what is that? The angels that's going to come with Yahweh Shai in the chariots, or what the world calls UFOs. See, "clothed in fine linen, clean and white. And out of his mouth goeth a sharp sword, that with it he should smite the nations." You see, and that sword is representing the fire coming out of the UFOs, or the spaceships, or the chariots, as we refer to them as. You see, and this is how the Lord's going to make war upon these nations. He's going to literally be, like you watch that movie, The War of the Worlds, how they was shooting, that stuff out of the tripods, and people was being evaporated in that concentrated fire. Yahweh Shai is coming in the same like manner with the host of angels, man. This is where you hear about there was war in heaven. Satan and his angels fought against Hamashiach and his angels. Is literally talking about this third world's war, where these nations are going to stop fighting one another and they're going to fight Yahweh Shai when he cracks those clouds. You can read about that in the second Ezra. It says, "And he shall rule them with a rod of iron, and he treadeth the winepress and the fierceness and wrath of the almighty power. And he had on his vesture and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And I saw an angel standing in the sun, And he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the fowls that fly in the midst of heaven, come and gather yourselves together unto the supper of the great power, that ye may eat the flesh of kings, and the flesh of captains, and the flesh of mighty men, and the flesh of horses, and of them that sit on them, and the flesh of all men, both free and bond, both small and great. See, because Yahushua, after he destroys these nations over there in the valley of Jehoshaphat, is going to be a great feast of these birds feeding on all of the dead carcasses and the dead bodies of these different army men of these nations. It says, and I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse and against his army. You see, so they're going to literally stop fighting one another and try to fight against Yahushua and the angels when they appear in the sky. And they're going to be literally destroyed and beaten and destroyed, man. Like I said, read about that in 2nd Ezra. You know, we've gone through it plenty of times, but hey, the stage is being set. And what he is saying is ultimately showing us that these times are near. So with that, I'm going to give all praise, honor, glory to Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. Lord willing, you were edified. Into the next one, Shalom.